Okay, folks, we're a little past due, but that's okay. Item one would be approval of the agenda. Actually, with the agenda, we'd like to, on the consent agenda, instead of having the audit findings under that, we'd like to have that as a separate issue as accept and file instead of just under the consent, just because, we need to do that instead of approving it. It's actually just accepting and filing. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to approve the amended motion.
I would make a motion, we approve the agenda as amended and make item D, little I, item E for discussion off the consent agenda.
I second it.
Okay, Tom and Donna, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Approval of the January 14th meeting minutes. Questions, changes? Thank you, Bruce. Tom, and seconded.
Second.
Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Director's report. Chad?
Thank you, Chairman. Board members, thank you. Just a quick update on MTP. Staff would like to report to you what's the status on MTP, what we had been accomplishing, what's upcoming type of thing. I think the next slide, if you can. So what we recently accomplished was project selection process. The WAMPO funding menu projects were identified by project selection committee. And then the next step is towards how do we get these projects into TIP for funding commitments. So that's upcoming in the March and April timeframe. That's what just had happened. In the next slide, please. So what's ongoing? Staff is very pleased with the way KDOT is working with us in the past couple of weeks. Corey Davis and his team, Mike Moriarty and Brent Streep and Matt Messina, all four of them had been very helpful in getting the projects into the MTP, because not just the WAMPO funding menu projects, as well as the local projects, but KDOT projects also makes the document complete. So, after 5 years of this working on the MTP, once it gets adopted in June, it binds all of us, member jurisdictions, as well as agencies and their transportation goals for the individual regions. So it's an important document, and we are very pleased to see the cooperation, and want to thank KDOT as well. So now the staff is working on fiscal constraint analysis, which is, we forecast funding, and then we look at the number of projects and the costs associated with those, and then does the document is complete once the fiscal constraint analysis is performed. EJ analysis is also a component. There are several components to this. All are ongoing. Environmental justice analysis is also based on the projects list that we have received. And document production is also, these are the things that are ongoing at the moment. So just want to keep update and report to you what's ongoing. So next slide, please. What's upcoming? On this MTP document, we have the draft document that's planned to have in March, so that the final public input process take place between March and May. And draft appendices are being updated by consulting firms as well as staff. All are working to make sure the appendices and technical documentation are in good shape. And pretty soon, TAC and TPB would have the opportunity to review these technical documents as well. The final approval, of course, is scheduled to be in June. As these preservation of the existing transportation system becomes important, multimodal transportation and integration of all modes of transportation is going on. We are also working with WSU, Wichita State University, on the technologies and its evolution, so that it's a comprehensive look of the transportation with respect to technologies as well. For example, autonomous vehicles and connected technologies, all those. So Matt here is there from WSU. Sarah and Abigail could not come. So there will be a presentation later on in the main agenda item on technologies and its evolution. So that's a quick update on what's going on with MTP. Any questions, the staff is here to, happy to update.
Questions for Chad, staff? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. The next item is the TIP update. As you all know, MTP is the long-range transportation plan, whereas transportation improvement program is the short term where the funding commitments are documented. So, next slide, please. The timeline for the TIP update is, the funding menu that's at the bottom that shows from January 2020 till April, that occurred in the January-February timeframe. Now from March and April timeframe, as you can see on the slide, there's a selection committee would determine what projects in the funding, WAMPO menu, funding menu would go into the TIP for funding commitments. So that's scheduled on the TIP. And also on the top, the parallel line on the top shows the KDOT and transit projects and local projects as well. They all lead into the final documentation. One of the unique things about this time of the cycle is both MTP as well as TIP are due at the same time. Usually TIP has a cycle of updating every 2 years, and then MTP has a cycle of updating every 5 years. So it's unique that both are due at the same time. So that's why both efforts are ongoing parallel and at the same time. Next slide, please. Any questions on the TIP? We'll be happy to. Okay, thank you. We have just February, just an update that an event webinar series that's happening on February 19, 2 p.m., same place, same room. Thank you, Chairman.
Questions or, if not, okay. Consent agenda is the 2019-2022 TIP amendment number 5. Are there any questions? If not, can I entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay, Tom and Troy, okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Item E would be the 2018 AGH audit findings. We just need to receive and put on file. I think Mike was here a couple months back and went through it. And let's, sure, Donna.
I need to add that you need to put draft in the first background statement because you did not have a final audit at that time. And your copy that, if anyone received one, does say draft, so that should be in the first paragraph. And then I would move and receive that we receive and file the 2018 audit done by AGH as.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Motion by her, second by David. Dennis, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Public comment, I believe. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Come on up. All right. And then, oh, we got 2 today. All right.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm Alan Kaler. I'm president of Bike Walk Wichita. I'm not really here today to speak specifically about bicycle and pedestrian matters, but really the ultimate mission of Bike Walk Wichita is to make the WAMPO area a better place to live. And so I'm going to address a couple of the agenda items today. The first is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan Funding Menu Project List. And the second is the major regional priorities. Regarding the MTP funding menu, Bike Walk Wichita supports the significant allocation of bicycle and pedestrian projects that represented in that list. We endorse that. We thank you, and we hope that most of those are funded. But more broadly, Curious about the selection process for the projects. Last year, as you know, you adopted the vision and outcome statements for the reimagined Move 2040 plan. That statement includes 5 desired outcomes for projects in the area, one of which is equity and diversity. If you look at the selection criteria scoring sheet for the MTP menu, it shows 8 criteria, some of which have some relationship to the 5 criteria that are in the vision and outcomes, some of which seem a little tenuous, but most importantly, none of which seem to include equity and diversity. I would like to, so it seems that there's a disconnect between the stated objectives of the Move 2040 plan and the criteria that were used in selecting the projects that would be included in that list. So I would ask and suggest that you ask specifically how equity and diversity were considered in the selection of that funding list. So the stated objectives of the vision and outcomes seem to have been sort of silently modified in picking out the list for the MTP funding, but they seem to have been totally ignored in the selection of the major regional priorities. Now, I understand that the major regional priorities are not projects that WAMPO is funding, but nevertheless, they are a list of, if you adopt it, it is a list of the projects that you think are the most important ones in the region. And again, it seems that it would make some sense for the ones that you identify as being the most important projects have some relationship to the vision statement that you adopted last year. So as you know, the major regional priorities consist of 9 projects ranging from the North Junction to various projects along Kellogg, the Arc 95, and the Northwest Bypass. So if you would look at the, I know you don't have it in front of you, but I do, the vision and outcome statement that was adopted, let's look at how that vision matches up with those projects. The first one is safety and health, which envisions a decrease in the need for individual vehicle use. The second is integrated multimodal transportation network, which the objective is to encourage the use of transit and other forms of mass ridership and active transportation and reduce the need for individual vehicle use. The third is expanding the economy through mobility. The objective is to preserving and maintaining our existing infrastructure and having targeted improvements to address identified bottlenecks. The fourth is advance equity and acknowledge diversity, with particular attention given to minority and low-income populated areas. And fifth is expanding the economy through quality of place to attract and retain talent. And the objective is to have a transportation infrastructure that serves highly walkable, transit-friendly land uses. Now, again, looking back at the list of the 9 major regional priorities that have been submitted to you, I can see how some of those probably advance the objective of reducing identified bottlenecks. Perhaps some of them, in fact, also include preservation and maintenance objectives. But that's only one of 5 objectives that is incorporated in the vision and outcomes. I don't see that the 9 projects address any of the other 4 objectives that you have said are the most important things to be accomplished in this plan. So it's difficult to see how the regional major priorities that are being submitted conform to the vision and outcomes for the reimagined Move 2040 plan. In fact, it really appears that the major regional priorities are a vision for the 1950s, not for 2040. I would ask that you seriously consider the vision and outcomes and ask that the regional priorities be reconsidered in light of those and be selected on the basis of the stated vision and outcomes. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, next.
Thank you so much. I'm going to say ditto. although I have signed in on behalf of a certain local organization, I do not speak on behalf of any of the organizations to which I belong. My name is Jane Burns, and I want to follow up on what Alan said, that sometimes as a family, a city, a county, a state, we fix one problem, then we, responsible folks that we are, must move on to the next problem. We must identify and fix what's wrong now. You remember that I'm a health professional and a concerned citizen, grandma, neighbor, and friend. And Walker, seems to me that we're closing in on fixing highways. We in Kansas have the 4th largest number of highways in the nation. Seems to me we're closing in on fixing congestion. In fact, in the WAMPO area, there's 26 seconds of delay on highways and major roads, with an additional 5 seconds at freeway intersections, freeway bottlenecks. So we've fixed highways, we've fixed congestion. Seems to me we need to move on to other priorities. So I have this crazy idea also that we must now fix safety for those outside our powerful cars. Here's just a couple of examples. One in my neighborhood. On January 14th, a 90-year-old retired attorney was in the crosswalk and walking with the traffic light when he was struck by a car and dragged down Douglas. He must have been a tough guy because he didn't die for another 4 days. We live in an area where a 90-year-old rich guy died after crossing his street a block from his home. Who's looking at or analyzing or caring for seniors? Who has the funding or the staff time or the interest to see if what was safe in 1960 is safe now? The Wichita School District, turns out, and I'm talking again about Wichita because that's where I live, Wichita School District doesn't track student crashes or much beyond its parking lots and barely its sidewalks. Like last summer, volunteers from the KU Medical Center and Bike Walk Wichita are again partnering to paint crosswalks around schools. Last summer, we painted 8 crosswalks, and at that rate, we'll get them all done in 12 years in Wichita. So shouldn't all schools be safe now? Shouldn't all kids and their families have that protection? Are your schools safe to walk and bike to? And should volunteers paint crosswalks? I'm a happy painter, but I don't get those lines straight like our city crews would. Those are just Wichita's cases because I live in Wichita, and it's a couple of safety concerns for sure, but maybe that's happening in your neighborhoods and your towns. A week ago, I went to a conference sponsored by the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. So the participation was statewide. There were 8, on the last day, there were 11 towns from around Kansas stating their perceived obstacles for safe, healthful, outdoor physical activity. 8 of those 11 stated they had inadequate sidewalks. 6 of those towns stated issues around schools. Among those folks who are looking for hazards to safety and health around their towns, I heard similar concerns then from towns large, but also small, all sizes, discourage physical activity because they're enabling cars. So seniors and students are part of the 1/3 of my estimate of the folks who do not drive. And here I come up with that 1/3 statistic. About 40% of Kansans are under the age of 18. About 9% are over the age of 65. I don't know how to count those with low vision, in wheelchairs, seizure disorders, folks who don't want a car or can't afford a car, tourists, folks who have a car but are just crossing their own street. A third of Kansans are out of their cars a lot or occasionally. WAMPO states in its most recent report summary that now 88% of the $170 million a year goes to highways and roads, 11% to transit, and less than 1% to bike ped. You can call that 90-year-old attorney, that rich guy, a bike ped if you want. You can call those children who are walking to school bike ped if you want. But the thing is, we decision makers need to protect those folks. This is a plea to decision makers to devote crumbs of the highway, intersection, roadway money to fund safety and health and mobility to those folks outside of cars for systemic improvements that are sustained. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, new business, action item, election of officers. Myself and David are up for chair and vice chair. I would take nominations for the chair at this time.
Nominate Diane Wojak.
Are there any other nominations? At this time, we'll close those. All those in favor of Dan to resume as chair, say aye. Opposed? Okay. Vice chair, David Dennis.
I would nominate David Dennis.
Second. Tom and myself. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? And with that, I would nominate Tori Tabor as the TAC chair. Any other nominations? If not, all those in favor say aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you all. And we're going to move on to update technology.
Thank you, Chairman. Matt is here from Wichita State University. Thank you, Matt.
Can I advance it from here? Yeah. I can just click, that's fine. I'm Matt Stiles with the Public Policy Management Center. I'm here to kind of pinch hit for Abigail Hammock and Sarah Gooding, who are graduate assistants who've been doing a lot of work for you on the literature review for the Transportation Future Project. So I'll just kind of go through, I'll kind of break down the 5 main points of the literature review that we have so far and talk a little bit more about the process and the project itself. So who we are, we're the Public Policy Management Center, formerly known as the Center for Urban Studies at the Hugo Wall School. So we've got 55 years of experience working in a community. We've done a lot of work for a lot of different people in this room. We do applied research, we do technical assistance, we do facilitation, professional development, lots of training, lots of different things. It's a pretty good chance that you've seen us at some point, and we're happy to help with anything you have. One of the things we are proud of is we do have graduate assistants, part of Wichita State's vision to have applied learning opportunities, and the 2 graduate assistants who are working on this project are actually doing it for credit. So it's been a great opportunity to work with a lot of elected officials, a lot of different people for them, and we're happy to have that opportunity and happy to be here with you. So the project we're doing here is just really kind of goes into the idea of future of transportation. So what we're doing is engaging WAMPO stakeholders in this conversation. So we're holding 15 focus groups outside, within the region, within the city of Wichita and to the areas outside of Wichita. We're also going to be doing an online survey tool. And Troy was actually good enough to help us with the video production. So he stood in there and did a little video production with us. So he's got an introduction video, and then we've got kind of a framing video for people to watch before they take the survey, just to give them sort of a background, baseline informational knowledge about the future of transportation and items that we know that they're going to need in order to reasonably answer the questions. We're also doing a lit review. We're going to have a media event to launch the online survey. And then, the online survey, we're actually in the process of doing everything right now. We should have some good representation back to you, some impressions back to you by May so that you can finish up for your 2040 plan. So getting into the research, we've got 5 main components of it. The first is smart cities, kind of thinking about the future of technology. The idea of smart cities is something that's kind of permeated, even in Wichita. Done a lot of pilot projects around smart city technology. It's about incrementally increasing or utilizing, leveraging technology in order to improve various aspects. In this case, we can point to the Maple Street stoplight synchronization, which is something simple, but it's a great example of utilizing smart city technology in order to improve people's quality of life. Enhanced 5G internet's another big thing. We've had some pilot projects, I think, with Verizon in the city of Wichita that's been able to kind of expand that technology infrastructure, and that's going to be the key to moving forward with smart cities. In this section of the research, we looked at some peer communities, Tampa, Florida, Kansas City, Columbus, Ohio, and kind of what they are doing, and give you a snapshot of sort of what that looks like as it is today. So smart cities, smart city technology, and interconnectedness is going to be an important piece too. Fear, trust, and willingness to change is obviously something that is probably kind of apparent. When you talk about things like autonomous vehicles, unproven technologies, people get a little bit antsy about that. So there's the risk of it, which when you talk about statistically speaking, when you remove human error, 95% of accidents are caused by human error. When you remove that from the equation, statistically, they should have a much better and much safer experience. However, people are not willing to step into that role just yet because they don't feel the technology has been proven. They don't feel like it's something that they can trust just yet. Not surprisingly, younger audiences are early adopters of this technology, so we find in the research that they're much more willing to embrace automated vehicles and that type of smart city technology. I don't think that's a shock to anybody. But how are we going to take that and capture that idea and then move forward as they become the key stakeholders in your community? How do we adapt our technology and our environment in order to allow them to be part of that? Technology and infrastructure, this goes right along with smart cities, but the key here is connectivity. So this is, when we're talking about technology and infrastructure, we're talking about the ability for, say, an autonomous vehicle to talk to other autonomous vehicles on the street, to talk to citizens on the street, to the information network, the communication grid, to the stop signs, stop lights, all the control devices. So the interconnectivity is key. And as the 5G internet advances, that we see that that's going to be sort of where the future is. So the idea now is to take steps that you can invest in now, which will be incremental, but will allow you to avoid expensive retrofitting costs. So thinking about these technologies now when you do projects is a good way to baby step into them without making a full commitment. Equity considerations, when we talk about equity, just like the two previous speakers had talked about, the technology, it's got a plus and some minuses for equity. There's kind of mixed research on what ride-sharing apps, so we're thinking about Lyft, Uber, those type of ride-sharing things, can increase equity. It's kind of a mixed bag. We don't know, the jury's still out on what finally what we would say about that, but there's definitely potential for increasing equity in transportation. Autonomous vehicles and other technologies, we see that as a real opportunity too. The research points to particularly aging populations and people with disabilities. Those are populations that can definitely benefit from that type of technology. So being able to think about how those things are processed in the future and thinking about those when you're making transportation decisions would be really effective and probably see it a lot more return on your investment. The literature we find predicts the increase in mobility, again, for aging adults. And then we have this issue of equity and the loss of lower paying jobs. There's actually some statistical evidence that points to African American and Hispanic communities. I think there's kind of a correlation between the low paying jobs, particularly in transit, as one of there are people who fill those type jobs traditionally based on the research. And so there's a potential for loss of those jobs, but there's an opportunity there also for retraining and moving into a different spectrum. I mean, we've always had this issue as technology advances. We don't have buggy whip manufacturers anymore. We've kind of adapted to that. So as the technology changes, that too will have to change. And there's opportunities, again, to deal with gender and income disparities. So an equalization effort, depending on how that transportation grid or transportation system looks. And then again, we have the rural and urban divide. So we have that even in Sedgwick County. We can kind of see how the differences between more rural communities and being able to get transportation into for medical services, for shopping, for whatever it is. There's going to be some tension there, and there's going to have to be some thought process on how that works too. So talent and quality of life as part of the transportation network, we know that a lot of these things are tied together. So when we talk about Project Wichita, that was a big project we did in 2018. One of the things that came up, a lot of the things that came up about quality of place are actually tied to transportation issues. So we know that building out the infrastructure, walkability, being able to adapt to these type of moving technologies is going to be really important for attracting talent. Younger people, there's some statistics about millennial households owning fewer personal vehicles, and as technically a millennial, I don't know if that's exactly true or if that's exactly applicable in Kansas, but the trends nationally are moving toward that. So we have to think about that when we think about what type of projects we want to invest in and what type of infrastructure we want to invest in. And then again, transportation accessibility are going to be paramount too. So people have to have accessible transportation. These things can be real economic drivers, but we have to be thoughtful in our investment decision making. So again, thinking about the project as a whole, what's going to happen next? We're going to have this media event that's going to kick off, and we're going to have the video and the online survey available for people to take. We're also doing the focus groups. So again, we're doing those across the WAMPO region, not just in Wichita. And then the survey research, we're going to analyze some of those that online survey data to give you some impressions about what exactly you're seeing in the region and what kind of response. But hopefully we'll get a pretty good response so we can kind of slice that data for you in different ways to give you some different conclusions and add that into the perception data or the qualitative data that we gather in the focus groups. So the call to action for you today, watch for updates. This is going to be really important. And you personally can participate by taking the survey, and if there's a focus group near you, we'll make sure that we get those all out there and you get an invitation to attend those and participate in those. We want you in those focus groups. But probably the biggest thing that you can do as community leaders is share this information. So share invitations, try to drive people to the focus groups, try to drive people to the online survey. Talk to everybody you know. I want it in churches, I want it in community groups, I want it at the Rotary, I want it everywhere. So that is your mission for today, is to take that information when we get it out, look for all those updates coming from Chad and from WAMPO, and you're tasked with getting that out there as best you can so that we can actually have a nice large data set that you can draw conclusions from. So with that, I will stand for any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up is Chris, presenting on MTP components on a couple of things. So thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. So first of two items today, I wanted to talk to you about the project list for our MTP. Now, this month, this is an update item. We'll be coming back to you for action next month. But we figured you're very interested in the projects, particularly the WAMPO funding menu. So we wanted to bring this to you as an update item ahead of time. Now, our project list for the MTP comes from a couple of different sources. It's sort of pieced together from these three different areas. First off is the projects that are currently in the 2019 to 2022 TIP, our current TIP. And basically everything in there will automatically roll over into the new MTP. They're grandfathered in. If you have a project in the TIP right now, it'll go right into the new MTP. The federal funding level will stay the same. Just roll right in. So that one's pretty simple. Second is the WAMPO funding menu, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And then third is the state and locally funded projects. Now, talking about the WAMPO funding menu, this is our list of projects and amounts of money for each project that are eligible for WAMPO's $12 million a year of federal funding. If you want your project to get WAMPO funding, you need to be on this list, but being on this list isn't a guarantee of getting funding. We'll probably end up funding about half of this list over the next 6 years. And specifically, this list is projects that will look to get built from 2023 to 2028. So that's what the funding menu covers. So this list is the product of a process that has run for a good part of the past year. Back last summer, we had a call for projects, invited all of our member jurisdictions and planning partners to submit projects for consideration. Once they were submitted, we had some staff screening, went over and rated projects, made sure all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed. And then these projects went to a project selection committee. This committee was composed of 3 members of this body, Troy Tabor, Donna Klassen, and Ann Stevens, and then 3 members of the TAC, Jim Weber, Dan Squires, and James Wagner. And I do want to thank all 6 of them for their service. They put a lot of time into this, came to a lot of long meetings, so we really appreciate all the effort that they put into that. They did some great work for us. Among all that work was hearing presentations from all the project sponsors. Every sponsor got a chance to come in and make their case for their projects. They also went over the ratings on the project selection criteria and confirmed those. And finally, they came up with a recommended project list, and that list of recommended projects is what has gotten integrated into the WAMPO project list, and we will ask you to approve or disapprove of that recommendation at your next meeting. So I'm not going to go through all 50 or so projects that are on that WAMPO funding menu, but I did want to sort of summarize them at a high level, and I'll be happy to answer questions about any specific projects after I do that. In terms of the types of projects, the biggest slice you see there are what we're calling road and bridge modernization projects. And sort of the archetypical project in this category would be taking a 2-lane rural road with open ditches on both sides and converting that to a 3-lane, more urban road with curbs and gutters, probably a sidewalk and a multi-use path. We also have a couple of projects in there that start with 4-lane urban roads and actually cut those down to 3 lanes. So going from 2 lanes in each direction to 1 lane in each direction with a center left turn lane. Depending on how many left turns you have on that particular stretch of road, that can actually work better than the 4-lane setup. And then using the extra space generated by that to add bicycle pedestrian facilities, for instance. They're a smaller fraction of this, but there are some in there, and I think that's something fairly new and innovative for our region. So I was glad to see some of our project sponsors submit projects like that. Next big slice is what we're calling road and bridge rehabilitation projects. These are projects essentially where the pavement or structure is worn out. It's either in poor condition now or it's going to be in poor condition sometime in the next 10 years. And so these projects involve going in, tearing it up, putting in a new road surface or new bridge structure that's gonna last for many years to come. Now, it's important to note that many of these rehabilitation projects also include modernization elements. A lot of times, if you're gonna do this rehabilitation, it also makes sense to upgrade the road while you're at it, not just to put back exactly what was there before if something more is needed. Next biggest slice is bicycle and pedestrian projects. This is, let's see, this is about 9.5 million, sorry. Those first 2 categories, the modernization was 73 million, the rehabilitation projects were 51. So 9.5 million for dedicated bicycle and pedestrian projects. And these are sort of standalone bike ped projects in this category. It includes things like a new segment of the Red Bud Trail or the Ark River to Hayesville Bikeway. It is important to note that many of the projects in the modernization and rehabilitation categories, while they're primarily road projects, they do include some bike ped infrastructure, either a multi-use path or on-street bike lanes. It's kind of hard to actually tease out what that represents in a dollar figure, so we're just showing the 9.5 that we know are bike ped. They're dedicated bike ped projects. Next up is a fairly small slice for transit. That includes some money for the Sedgwick County Department on Aging, which runs paratransit service, and some money for Wichita Transit to do a study of a new network design, a new more grid-focused concept versus their sort of hub and spoke system that they have now. The next larger slice there is some technology money, mostly for KDOT and for the city of Wichita. Some of that will go sort of to expanding the traditional which-way system we already have, which provides coverage on our area freeways, those big black variable message signs you see, cameras, that sort of thing. But a good portion of that is going to go to arterial ITS. The city of Wichita is making investments in their core area as well as elsewhere in the city. And some of the KDOT money will go to partnering with local jurisdictions to do ITS on major arterial corridors. An example of that we've done in the past is the project on K15 that added some signs and cameras down there. We'd like to replicate that has been successful there on some of the other big corridors in our region. Finally, we have a slice up there at the top for planning, which warms my heart as a planner. Some for some money there for WAMPO, some also for other entities to do planning projects. So speaking of who is getting these dollars, there is basically a pretty even split between the city of Wichita and other WAMPO member jurisdictions. You see about 71 billion for the city and 68 for our other cities and counties. The next biggest slice there is KDOT, and all of that is for technology projects. KDOT does not generally ask us for money for their more traditional road and bridge projects. They fund those out of their own assets, but they do ask for us to chip in on some of these technology and operations projects. And finally, that last little slice there at the top is about $2.2 million for 3 WAMPO projects. So that's it for the funding menu. Moving on to the third component here is state and locally funded projects. And just to explain why these are on the list, there is a federal requirement that our MTP lists all regionally significant projects regardless of how it's funded. So if it's a regionally significant project that the county is doing or one of our cities, we still need to have it on the list even if it's not getting any money from WAMPO or from the federal government. So what we've done is gone through all of the CIPs for all the city and the county. Kristen Zimmerman put a lot of time into this. I'm sure it was all just scintillating reading everyone's CIPs there. And also working with staff from all of our member jurisdictions to make sure we have the projects on the list that we need and that we're representing them correctly. Third bullet here is actually an update since we sent out the packet. KDOT has provided us a list of the major state capital projects that they're currently thinking about for this region. Obviously, that list is subject to change depending on the outcome of KDOT's long-range plan and the debates that are currently going on in the legislature, but they have a list that can at least go on this. However, the reason we haven't given you that list yet is we're currently resolving some issues with the numbers, but as soon as we get that resolved, we'll get it to you, and it'll also go to the TAC for their action later this month and for you next month. So, questions on the WAMPO project, MTP project list? All right, next up is major regional priorities. So just to review the concept behind this, the idea is to define what the most important projects in our region are. And this is primarily as a tool intended for getting KDOT or federal funds or other outside funding. So when one of our communities does a grant application, a build grant or an infra grant, they can say in their grant application, this was recognized as one of the most important regional priorities by our local MPO. And that, having talked to the folks at Federal Highways and USDOT that evaluate these grants, that does carry some weight. The other aspect is when we talk to KDOT, or perhaps when all of you talk to the state legislature, some of those discussions are ongoing up there as we speak. This is another tool for us to influence their decisions. Now, we have been at this process for a while. You may remember that the policy body approved a list of 15 priorities in 3 tiers back last summer, but you did want to revisit that, and in October asked the TAC for their input. In turn, the TAC formed a smaller group that could more easily have these discussions, led by Tom Jones. And that committee has recommended a list of 9 projects. And we basically got down from the 15 to the 9 by concentrating on the biggest projects, primarily KDOT projects within those. So some of these that are sort of were on the initial list, but maybe are not a specific project or more broader concepts like technology or electric vehicle charging kind of dropped off. And some of these smaller projects also dropped off, just focusing on the largest ones. There also was the addition of 1 new project that wasn't on the list of 15 that I'll talk about in a moment. So here's the list. As always, the highest regional priority remains the North Junction. No change to that. That is, by pretty much universal acclaim, the most important priority in our region. Underneath that, the group divided these projects into 3 categories: modernization, expansion, and new roadways. Modernization in this sense means something a little different than what we were talking about with the WAMPO funding menu. In this case, the modernization projects are basically interchange upgrades. You can see the I-235 and Kellogg Blue Phase on there, which is upgrading that interchange. K254 would involve upgrading some of the interchanges along 254 where we've had issues with high-speed accidents. It wouldn't necessarily be an interchange every mile, but some interchanges and maybe improvements at some of the other intersections there to help mitigate that problem. And finally, our one new project is the US 54 and I-135 interchange. This is one that's come up in our region more recently. I believe the city of Wichita raised this at KDOT Local Consult last fall. And the idea here essentially is that there are some issues in the way the freeway-to-freeway interchange interacts with the interchanges with Washington on the east and with Grove and Hillside on the west. You get some weaving movements there that cause some issues. So this sort of project would aim to address those. The expansion is essentially adding new lanes to existing freeways or upgrading surface streets to freeways. East Kellogg would carry the Kellogg Freeway from its terminus at the end of the project that's going on right now, right by K96 out through Andover. West Kellogg would extend the Kellogg Freeway west another couple of miles. And then finally, the K96 project would be adding additional lanes and upgrading some of the interchanges along K96 there from 135 out to Greenwich, where we do see some heavy volumes. Finally, the last category, new roadways, two projects that have been much discussed in this body and in the region. ARC 95, the new east-west connector down by Derby and Hayesville, and the Northwest Bypass running a new freeway from approximately Mays down to Goddard, connecting up K96 and 54 out west there. So, any questions about these projects? I know you've heard about some of these from some interested parties over the past few months, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can.
I'd like to clarify something on here, and for those of you that have noticed, bike ped is not on here. It was identified in one of the 16 projects originally. These are major projects and interchanges and freeway type activity that normally have bike ped on it. And we had a bike ped representative in that meeting, and he understood that pretty much everything else that comes through WAMPO has bike ped with the proposal. So our normal business includes that, but these projects probably wouldn't, and he agreed with us. So I just wanted to clarify that. And one other thing, those categories, the way they're listed there, are not necessarily in the points order. They're just bucketed for this group.
No, yes, these are listed in alphabetical order. No ordering implied, just aside from the North Junction being the highest priority, of course.
Any other questions? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the major regional priorities. Jack and Bruce, all those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, and if any of you happen to be talking to your state legislatures in the near future, we would love it if you would mention these.
I do have one question that's related to that. We did buckets and we've got them in by priority or not priority, but in a bucket by type of project. Is it the intent of this group to put those in order, or do we just want to submit those like we get on?
This group can do as it likes. I think the staff intent at this point was simply to identify the North Junction as the highest priority, and everything else is on the list in no particular order.
I just want to get clarification, so.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. Run with it. Okay, committees and partnerships. Executive committee, we met last month. We discussed the audit a little bit. We talked about the 2019. They'll be working on it and bring back recommendations. We're gonna, the executive committee will meet in the next month with AGH for recommendations on what we need to do to go forward to implement or change some of the things so we can work better for a cleaner audit. Just a few. I think there was 5 issues on there, so we're gonna be working on that. With that, Tom?
Congratulate Troy on taking this position. The things we talked about this month and approved was the tip update and the major priorities. Don't have anything else.
Okay, Tom, do you have anything? We always appreciate hearing from you.
Tom Hine with Kansas Department of Transportation. Thank you. Northbound I-235, that project, we call it the Green Project. The first phase of the North Junction fix is entering year 2. So 2 more years. So, and then we hope to move on a little bit more towards more direct repairs necessary on that North Junction. But this weekend, Saturday, February 15th, we'll have a complete closure of northbound I-235 from North Meridian through the project to east of North Broadway. This is to realign traffic onto new pavement and new bridge. So on Sunday or Saturday night, if you're out driving, you may find that you are on 2 new lanes, although to a driver, it's still going to be the same. You're still on 2 lanes of traffic and you're channeled through the construction zone. You'll just be on newer pavement. So it's a kind of a significant thing moving forward on this, but we still have 2 more years. So short-term closure this weekend. And of course, on southbound 135, the long bridge from 21st Street all the way down to 1st Street is constantly being repaired for the last almost year. It will be a year in May. And every weekend, they chip away at things that they can do when traffic numbers are down, and it creates congestion over the weekend. And then on Monday morning, they switch to the right side, the right lane closure, and they'll close anywhere from 1 to 5 ramps along there. And so it's a little messy, let's say, and it changes every week. And I try to keep people updated, but I get a lot of phone calls on that. And that's just the nature of that beast, I think. And good news, we've got another one coming, and that's going to be northbound 135, same area. Those bridges are a little aged, and they need some work. There's a lot of patching to do. There's a lot of expansion joint repair. So it's gonna be another nice year on northbound. So they're almost finished with the major work on the southbound side, but they've still got some things to do when the weather warms in March and April, and so that project would finish late spring, and the other one will kick in about then. And of course, spring's coming, so we're going to have a whole host of other projects up and down the highways and freeways. So I'll keep you apprised of those. Any questions for me? Oh, thank goodness.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Okay, Mike, I think you have a presentation for us.
Save 20 slides for late in the day, so you can always count on me. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members and guests. Good afternoon, WAMPO staff. Again, Mike Moriarty with KDOT. Agenda item before you is an update on our long-range planning process, our proposed transportation program, which we're calling Forward, and a little bit of a summary on the rounds of local consult we conducted last year. For those of you that are not familiar with local consults, this is basically KDOT's statewide public engagement efforts that we conduct every few years. What happens is KDOT staff travels outside of Topeka, and we host some regional meetings around the state. At its core, it really is our opportunity to dialogue directly with our customers and discuss all matters transportation. These most recent rounds of local consult, again, last summer and fall, were particularly important because they're helping support the development of our long-range plan. They're also helping us build support for our new funding program, which again, we are calling Forward. So it's been a few years since our last round of local consults, almost 5 years to be exact. To help get caught up, we did conduct 2 rounds of local consult last year, summer and fall. That amounted to about 16 meetings total statewide. The first round was back in August. We visited each of KDOT's 6 districts, and we hosted meetings in our 2 major metros, those of course being Wichita and Kansas City. Kansans did show up in a big way. We had about 1,100 people. Let me go ahead and do that. Participated in that first round of local consult. Each event featured a project discussion and a scenario planning exercise where participants discussed 3 potential futures and how transportation could be affected under each of those futures. In November, we held our second round of local consult, had just over 800 people attend during this session, a bit lower, but still somewhat impressive. Building upon the conversations from round 1, this time our conversations focused on reviewing our list of potential projects and our preliminary project scores, and trying to find consensus regarding regional priorities, transportation priorities. We also talked about how to allocate our scarce resources across our various funding programs and ways to potentially improve KDOT business practices. So coming out of that 2019 local consult process, we've had a lot of positive feedback from our stakeholders. People seem to enjoy the scenario planning exercise. I think they enjoyed it more than they thought they would, to be quite honest. Some of our most provocative conversations came from some of the smaller areas in Kansas. I would also note some of our most rural-centric conversations happened in the large urban areas, which I thought was noteworthy. There is also tremendous recognition in the urban areas that urban needs are great, but the rural needs are similarly critical, particularly in support of the Kansas cattle and ag industries. We also had a nice soundbite from Katy Eisenhower in Scott County. Again, underpinning the importance of having a conversation about the regional needs instead of focusing entirely on specific project requests during those conversations. So as we stitch together our notes from those 16 meetings, it becomes apparent the Kansans want KDOT to prepare for any future scenario. So whether the smaller communities thrive, the masses flock to the urban areas, or we experience continued extreme weather, we need a program that inherently provides more flexibility, nimbleness to be responsive to change, and provides more opportunities and points of entry for projects to receive KDOT funding, and of course includes a meaningful multimodal component. So after spending even some more time reviewing what was discussed, we began to see several more specific goals that were emphasized across most of our meetings. A lot of these are things you'd expect to hear, right? Safety, equity, stability with regards to funding, but there were also conversations about new things, right? Like technology and broadband expansion. And historically, those topics have not been discussed at local consults, so it was very exciting for us to be out and about and hear those topics gaining some interest statewide. So high-level guiding principles under Forward have also started to take shape. So Secretary Lorenz has been adamant from day one, this funding program, if approved, right, must emphasize things like, again, flexibility and responsiveness, and KDOT being a partner in problem solving, not just part of the problem, but we need to be a partner on that solutions path. And again, even a greater focus on partnerships to accomplish more. Aside from the fact that Forward can be accomplished within our existing revenues, one of the most interesting components of Forward is the rolling program concept. Previous KDOT 10-year funding programs have had a set list of projects from the outset. And 20, 30 years ago, that might have made sense, but not so much anymore. And under Forward, we will select projects for the project development pipeline and construction pipeline every 2 years. This will enable KDOT to be a bit more responsive to market shifts. And that's important, right? Because the pace of change has accelerated over time, and this framework, this approach will help us be more responsive. Now, the rolling program also raises some questions for us to consider, or perhaps even concerns, right? How do we ease concerns about not having that set list up front? People are used to seeing those projects announced at the outset. Now we're picking them every 2 years. So how do we deal with that? And how can we be more transparent during these more frequent selection processes? So what are some of the next steps with Forward? Right now, we're reviewing input and finalizing our engineering and economic scores. We're also working on developing our local input scores as well. And regarding the legislation for Forward, It has been introduced. Last Thursday, it was read in, HB 2588, Senate Bill 375. And if approved by the legislature, we do intend to begin selecting projects for the development pipeline in summer of 2020, so we'll stay tuned on that. Also wanted to give a quick update on our long-range plan update. In parallel with Forward, we are updating our long-range transportation plan. This is a performance-based and scenario-driven document. It will outline our agency goals and objectives and include a rather hefty organizational assessment of KDOT itself. So what this org assessment will do is essentially map out how KDOT should be staffed and organized to not only deliver Forward, but to operate in kind of this changing transportation world. Some of the focus areas that we've accomplished in 2019 for the long-range plan, you can see those here. Most of these efforts were not only in support of the plan itself, they were also helping us develop the framework for the Forward Transportation Program. In 2020, we're going to get involved with some of the more traditional, robust planning aspects of the long-range plan. And as those tasks start to unfold, we'll be giving more updates to this group and other groups as well. We are targeting completion of our long-range plan spring of 2021. We don't have a website right now. It's still being crafted. We're trying to get a Forward program website and a long-range plan website kind of as one, but we don't have Forward yet, so it's hard to launch that website right now. So stay tuned on that. We will get that web link out once it's complete. For now, our local consult summaries are available at this website here. Apparently it's /localconsult/local consult. So the event's so nice, we named it twice. And with that, I can certainly stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Federal Highway, anybody here from Federal Highway that wants to talk? All righty. Other business? If not, Tom.
I got a comment, something I brought up in the fall to the TAC. Some night when you're up late and you go on the computer playing and don't have anything else to do, Google plastic roads and look what's going on around the world. I know Wichita right now is talking about bags and plastic bags and doing away with them and stuff. But there's a lot of people taking the bottles and the bags and other plastic and making roads out of them. They've got some that are 10 years old, still look brand new. So just trivia, but give you something to do late night if you need something.
Thank you. Anything else? If not, we're adjourned.